Ken Sugimori, the artist who redrew all 151 original Pokémon. He shaped their final look, designed many of the early cards, and still advises on Pokémon designs through generations. His soft watercolor style defined the series' early charm. But over time it evolved. Still, fans love it enough to recreate his style inside Pokémon itself. So, what makes his art so unique? How did it evolve? And what's the philosophy behind his designs? When we break down and analyze Ken Sugimori's art style as a whole, we have to look at it in context. His early work, his designs, and his later direction. While Pokémon is the franchise most people know him from, Sugimori himself has said he's more than just the Pokémon guy. There are, in fact, many artists involved in Pokémon, each with their own style, but all adhere to one shared design language. In other words, when we use Sugimori's art as a reference, is that Sugimori didn't necessarily abandon the old style fans loved. He adapted to what Pokémon became. We can see this in his early trainer art. Sharper lines, more angular silhouettes, compared to the rounder shapes of later generations. We can especially notice it in the faces. The boxy low angular cheeks have softened, yet their structure still subtly defines the face. The character structure and proportions stayed similar, but the eyes changed. Now they have larger irises and pupils instead of those focused, piercing eyes he used to draw. Still, his characters retain that natural energy. Sugimori likes to capture people in the moment, not as cool heroes, but as relatable figures. He applies the same philosophy to his Pokémon designs. The technique I often use when finishing up designs for Pokémon is to keep the balance. I might add something uncool to a Pokémon that's too cool, or something cheerful to one that's too serious. But before diving deeper into that, when we look closer at the technical side of his work, it's clear Sugimori aims to express energy through his original line art, even though his later works lean toward a cleaner finish. I don't use tools to draw circles either, it's always freehand. I just don't like lines to be too neat. When you draw on paper, the lines look kind of rough when you look real close. I actually like that. Maybe you could say I have some kind of line fetish. Most manga artists are very careful to clean up their lines, but I actually think it looks cool. Line fetish aside, he eventually switched to digital tools for convenience, adopting a more standardized structure for his card illustrations and recent works. However, when we revisit his original art, one thing that still defines Sugimori's identity is his coloring. That signature watercolor aesthetic. In the early days, he worked entirely in traditional watercolor and a G-pen for the outlines. Deep reds, blues and greens burnt in like concentrated shadows. The white highlights weren't just for decoration, they shaped the forms, giving everything a curved, dimensional quality, with Crystal being the last one to show this traditional watercolor style. One thing remains constant though, his Pokémon are almost always drawn from dynamic angles, giving them a real sense of motion and life. In the beginning, I just tried to draw Kaiju-like monsters, but in a more cartoonish, exaggerated style. But I realized I'd never drawn monsters like that before. I was honestly pretty lost, but I managed to create about 20 or 30 different designs. That explains a lot when you look at his version of the Gen 1 Pokémon. His early redraws have that rough monster-like edge, true to the name Pocket Monsters. Nowadays they've evolved into gentle, friendlier companions. However, behind that shift lies a clear design philosophy. We always divide the roles for the 3 starter Pokémon, by which I mean we assign each of them a distinct personality. For example, we make a cool one, a serious one, and a funny one. When we agreed on the concepts for Tepig and Sniffy, we decided Tepig would be the funny one, and Sniffy would be the cool one. So we know Oshawott would have to be the serious one, which is how he ended up with the facial expression you see in his final design. Sugimori has served as a design director across many generations, setting the creative baseline. And I think that's a clever approach, because everyone has a favorite starter for a reason. For sure, his peers helped refine the Pokémon aesthetic. Rounder shapes, softer silhouettes, and designs that feel approachable to all ages. After all, as Pokémon that are being sent out to the world, we want them to always remain memorable. However, I feel that in order to do so, you have to add a touch to it. For example, Look at Oshawot's cheeks. It has 3 freckles, and if you take them away, Oshawott becomes cuter. However, taking them away makes its face less memorable. Actually, a lot of people told me, I want you to get rid of the freckles. But I strongly insisted it is better to have them. Going by my standards, this is the correct way to design Pokémon. He elaborated further. These two show the value of a standard design without much of a twist. The difference all comes down to just one trait. In the case of Patrat, it's the eyes. If Patrat also had an unusually shaped tail, it would be too much, so we had to hold back a little. The same goes for Pidgeot. First and foremost, it had to resemble a pigeon, but then we also added a heart shape to its design. If a Pokémon looks too cool, it actually becomes less memorable. For example, Luxray would be even cooler if its head was smaller and its eyes narrower. But if it's too cool, it won't capture a player's heart. In essence, a great Pokémon design should be recognizable, easy to redraw, and instantly iconic, like a logo burned into memory. Yet, despite how deliberate his designs are, Sugimori never chased fame or legacy. There's a war raging in the world right now between popular characters. There are more monsters and cute girls than you can shake a stick at. I don't have such lofty dreams of creating something that will last for perpetuity. I'm Light Novel author GP Vugs, and I find it interesting that he never cared about legacy. Yet his work became one of the most recognizable visual languages in gaming and animation. Sometimes not chasing legacy is exactly what makes it inevitable.